Hi everyone, welcome back to the Car Chat podcast, or welcome to for the first time. I'm Sam Moores, and with me today I have David Dicker of Rodin Cars. Hello.
Yeah, hi.
Can you tell the audience a smaller bit about sort of who you are and what you do?
Yeah, I'm the founder of Rodin Cars. We've been working on this project for a long time, but we've been working on it seriously for the last 4 or 5 years. High-end cars, track cars, road cars.
And how, this is probably quite a long story, but sort of before Rodin Cars, how did you get to this point? Like, what have you done before and during, and where did it sort of...
Yeah, well, building cars is expensive. That's the first problem. So you need to make money, and that takes a long time. I've got a computer business in Australia and New Zealand that I started in 1978. It's now a public company. We had sales of $2 billion last year. It's got a market cap over 2 billion AU dollars. You know, I've made enough money out of that to be able to run this project. So, yeah. You know, it's expensive. You need a lot of equipment, and we like to try to do as much in-house as we can. And that requires machinery, and it requires buildings. We're just making a new 27,500 square foot building, and it's cost, just the building's $5 or $6 million.
Yeah.
Not including the millions of machinery that go into it.
If I'm correct, you started off in Australia, and then what made you move over to, well, with Rodin anyway, to pick New Zealand?
Yeah, well, I was born in Australia, but look, the car culture in Australia is weak because of the government and the police. Basically, they don't want young kids to muck around with cars, and they make it really difficult, and it's just crap, really. And there are the logistic issues. I mean, Sydney was a pretty big town when I was a kid, but now it's just a massive sprawl. And if you're going to build cars, you need a test track. And you've got to get out of the metropolitan area to build a test track. And you get so far out of Sydney before you can do that the thing's just not viable from that standpoint either. Whereas in New Zealand, there's still much more of a car culture here. Much more interest in cars and racing and all that kind of stuff, and the government and the police have got a different sort of attitude. I'm not saying that they're not heading in the same direction as Australia, but they're nowhere near down the same road, so it's a much better environment.
Yeah. I've spent a very small amount of time in Australia and a bit longer in New Zealand. I spent 2 summers instructing skiing down near sort of in Wanaka. Amazing
I used to live in the foothills of Mount Hutt and ski every day.
Oh, right.
Yeah, I first came to New Zealand in 99, and I was a pretty keen skier. I used to race a bit, and I did a lot of skiing there.
So what?
I've never skied in Wanaka though.
It's a cool. It's an amazing part of the world, and sort of it's funny skiing in Europe versus, let's say, New Zealand, because it's all really tiny there, but it's all like mental terrain. Anyway.
Yeah, but it's nowhere near. I've got a house in Italy, and I used to be able to ski out the front door, and
nice.
You know, only a very small lift. But I'm old. But you know, skiing in Europe is still on a whole different scale to skiing down here.
Yeah, massively
for sure.
Massively so. So, at what point in time did you start getting sort of interested in sports cars? Is it forever or?
Well, I started driving in 1970. I used to race small boats.
Oh,
and
right.
There's a lot of work in those, you know, because you build your own boat and you work on the boats and all this kind of stuff. And it's a massive amount of preparation. And, I mean, I enjoyed it. It was great. But with the car, you could just get in the car and go out for a bit of a spin. So it was much more accessible to, you know, have fun. And then, of course, I had a kit car when I was about 19 or 20, and a lot of guys always wanted to build my own car. So, you know, and I've always been interested in cars, and I've had a lot of cars, you know, and I just like cars. You know, they're fun.
Yeah, they are, 100%. And then, so before, when did you start? When did Rodin start? Where did the idea come from?
Well, the idea comes from way back when, because, you know, you're interested in cars and you want to do something. You don't know how you're going to do it, but I went to the UK and, you know, I'm not even sure what year it was. My daughter was riding in the Commonwealth Games in Manchester.
Oh, cool.
She was a cyclist on the road and the track, I can't even remember what year that was. It was probably 2006. We bought this old project, which was basically a GT1 project that a guy had built in '99 that we thought we could use as the basis for the car. And it was a car Lola had built for a customer. And
all right,
we sort of shipped it down. We got body moulds and lots of spares and all that stuff, and we shipped it down to New Zealand and thought that, you know, we could use that as at least the basis for the car. But one of the problems you've got is that, you know, another two-seat supercar, like there's only about 1 million of them already on the market.
Yeah.
So you haven't got much of a marketing hook there. And, you know, I started to think about it, and that's when we sort of gravitated the idea of building a single-seat car that'd be quicker than a Formula One. That was really the you know, the aim and the concept. And I couldn't really fund it in those days. I mean, I had some money. I wasn't destitute, but I didn't have enough money to do it properly. And the real issue you've got is, if you want to do these things properly, you've got to be able to just spend whatever it takes. You know, like it's no good saying, oh, well, we got a budget of X, Y, Z, because what do you do when you get to the end of the budget? Do you stop? I mean, you can't. So these sort of enterprises can't work like that. You've got to be in a position that no matter what you have to do, you'll be able to fund it and it won't be an issue. And it took me a long time to work into that position. I probably didn't really get into that position until, I don't know, 2014, 15, something like that. These sort of projects are really expensive. I mean, we got 15 guys working there, plus all the equipment and all the machinery and all the stuff. And, you know, there's even sort of ancillary things that people don't sort of think about, is that you buy other cars so that you've got benchmarks. Like, you know, we got a GP2 car here, got Senna GTR, got a Ginetta G57, we got 2 or 3 F3s, and then there's all the road cars, because you need all that stuff so that you can see what the market itself is up to and how the other guys have done it, and, you know, so you can measure against. Because otherwise, if you develop in isolation, well, that's not going to work out too well. I even had an old Formula One car at one stage.
How was that? What was that?
89 Leighton House. The last car Adrian Newey designed before he went to Williams. And it was a pretty good car, really, but, you know, it was designed for Ivan Capelli, and he was 65 kilograms, and I wasn't. So it was pretty hard to fit into. And, you know, it was fun to drive, but it was a bit sort of limited. And, you know, the F1, especially in those days, the F1 cars are only designed for a race weekend, and then you rebuild it, and that sort of makes it hard to run. So we didn't do a lot of running on it, and eventually I sold it to a friend of mine. Yeah.
During this time, the sort of like build up to now, were you racing yourself as well, or?
I raced a bit in Australia in the late 90s. I had a Mazda RX-7. I also bought a Formula Holden that didn't work too well. And I did a little bit of sort of so-called classic racing here in like early 2000 with an old Diablo SVR that I'd bought.
Oh, sick.
But it wasn't, I mean, you know, it was club racing. Yeah. I mean, it was fun. And then in 2017, I started doing Ferrari Challenge. So I've done three seasons in Ferrari Challenge, and I have a practice car here. And last year I was going to do Europe and Asia in Challenge, but I couldn't because of this panic thing.
What made you pick Ferrari Challenge versus the other things you could pick?
Well, the big advantage, like in Asia Pacific in Challenge, Ferrari themselves prepare the car, so you don't have to do any of the work on the car. They do it all. So all you've got to do is get to the round, and each car has its own mechanic, and then you share an engineer with 2 or 3 other guys. The last 2 years I've also had a coach, like a driver coach who just works with me. If you're going to do it in the normal way, you've got to have all the infrastructure to do it, and I'm in New Zealand. Yeah. So that's not really going to work, you know. And Ferrari does a real good job on it as well. So it's, you know, it's good. And I mean, Ferrari's a great brand. They got the strongest car brand in the world, and the cars are really good, and the whole thing's great, really.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, who wouldn't want to race a Ferrari? Like,
Yeah, exactly. And they're good racing cars, you know, like I've got a practice car here. Well, I got a 458 and a 488 practice car, and, you know, we've done thousands of laps here without any real issue in the car. I mean, to be honest, the things are amazingly durable considering how hard you beat on them.
That's impressive. At some point, so you started off with was it a Lola? Was that you're saying?
Yeah.
You started off with?
Well, it was called the Cintura, but it was based on, I think, the old Lola 9810 or something. Grip C car they'd built in the 90s.
And then
Grip C type.
At some point in time, you got in touch with Lotus. Is that right?
Oh, no. What happened was the Lotus guys contacted me about they had that T125 project and they wanted to get out of it. So we decided to take it up.
Was that useful for your development and processing?
The car needed a lot more work on it than I'd anticipated, but it has given us the ability to build up our infrastructure and the staff and all the other stuff. It's been enormously beneficial from that standpoint, but it certainly needed a lot more work than I expected. I mean, I've got a few Lotus road cars. I've got 3 of them, and, you know, they're real good cars in the concept. The concept is terrific, you know. I've got 340R, Exige 260 Cup, and a V6 Cup. You know, the concept is great, and the cars are pretty good, but, you know, they're only sort of 90% finished, you know.
Yeah.
There's all that sort of, you know, everyone knows about it. I'm not telling you any secret here.
Yeah, and they will never get finished now. They've all discontinued.
You know, I mean, Lotus would probably say that they just didn't have the budget to do it the way that, you know, Porsche and the other guys do it, and that's probably true because that last little bit of development on all those kind of things is a massively huge amount of work. Although some of the things are not quite that straightforward either, because in the say the V6 Cup, which is the basis for their one make racing car, there's not even a sort of a decent rest for your left foot. And there's no support for your feet in the footwell, and the footwell is aluminium. So you know, like, and they're things that could have easily, you know, I mean, we've fixed that stuff, but things that could have easily been done that they just obviously didn't think was worth bothering with.
It's weird how those quirky stuff like that happens and just never gets sorted. And like you said, that one pretty simple to sort.
Yeah, and you can't heel and toe the thing because the difference in, well, I can't, the difference in the weight of the throttle and the brake is so high that it's really, really difficult to sort of judge it. And other sort of, I mean, look, I've even driven on Lotus's test track, so I'm not saying they don't do any work on the cars, but they need more development, basically.
And that takes time and money, and like you said, they didn't have money for a long time. But
it takes a lot of time and a lot of money and lots of, you know, remaking things that seem to be okay and that'll operate, but if they don't operate quite the way you'd really want them to.
Yeah, one of the things when I was sort of reading about Rodin is you seem to have placed a heavy emphasis on doing as much as possible in-house.
One of the issues that we've got is that, you know, we're in New Zealand, so we don't really have an automotive contractor base. Like, my ex-wife told me that I should do the project in the UK or Italy, and she was probably right, but it was too far away. You know, like, I've still got this business in Australia. I mean, it's a public company, and I'm still the CEO and chairman, and, you know, living in Italy or the UK almost all of the year didn't seem like the right strategy. And besides that, the issue with contractors is contractors are good when you've got sort of volume, but at the development level, it's more difficult because you've got to make a lot of parts and reject them, and it's hard to do that with contractors because they're busy, they want to be busy, and it just makes it take forever to do stuff. Whereas when you got your own equipment and you want to make another XYZ, well, you can probably get it done in the next couple of days, and that makes a huge amount of difference. And we're particular about how things are and how they're done. It's not a matter of, well, okay, it's all right. I mean, we try to build the best car we can, and that requires a fair bit of mucking around.
How did you set, like, the goal for the car? Did you start off with like, I just want it to be, did you say like a certain pace, or you just like, let's just start and go and make it as quick as possible?
I wouldn't say there was any great plan there. I mean, I wanted to build a high-end car, and originally I was going to build a car for the road. But the road car situation's become a little bit more difficult. And one of the other issues, of course, is there's an enormous amount of work to do for road compliance. Yeah. And you don't have to do that on the track. And the other problem is that a lot of guys, I always had the fantasy of wanting to have a racing car you could drive on the road. But after you, especially when you start to race, you know, you can't drive like that on the road, you know, because you just can't. And none of my road cars are much good on the track, for instance, you know, and I've had heaps of good road cars. Like I had a 4-litre RS, you know, Porsche, and I've got Scuderia, Speciale, Pista, all these things. But none of them are all that good on the track if you drive them at the full quid, because they're built for the road, and there's just such a huge difference. So we sort of gravitated to the idea of building a car for the track rather than for the road. And then you've got to think about the marketing aspects of the thing, how are you going to market it? And then that's when we thought about the idea of being able to build a car quicker than an F1, because the way the rules are now, the F1 guys are so heavily restricted, that's not nearly as difficult a task as it probably appears to most people.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's a lead pipe cinch, it's not, but it's achievable. You know, like if the F1 cars were unrestricted, you know, or more or less unrestricted, then, you know, you wouldn't be in a position to even consider a thing like that. But they're so heavily restricted that, you know, there's an opportunity there.
Yeah, and presumably you have to find a balance as well, because your customers could be any sort of gentleman driver type person, maybe never raced a single seater or had much of experience in that. So designing the car so that, presumably this has been some of the task, so that anyone-ish, you know, Joe who's driven some cars can drive it.
Yeah, but that's not actually as difficult as it seems. Like in the FZ, for instance, you can drive that thing way below its full pace and still have fun, and it's not difficult. You know, there's none of this sort of, you know, you read these things like, oh, the aero doesn't work unless you're going flat out and all this sort of stuff. Most of that sort of thing's just not true, you know, you know. So you can drive the car at nowhere near the full potential and still be going quick and still have it enjoyable. And that's really what's good about it. It's not a case of if you're not driving it flat out, it's crap. And in some ways, it's better in that way than a GT car or the road cars are, because they've got much lower limits, and those limits are much easier to access for a regular driver. So you tend to push on, whereas in the open wheel car like this, to access the limits of the car requires real skill, you know.
Yeah, so and I imagine,
you know,
because of the power numbers and weight figures and stuff like that, it's just a completely different level of performance to anything you're going to driven. So it'll take you a long time to get up to that.
Yeah, well, when you accelerate the FZ out of a corner in second gear, the acceleration's so vicious it hurts your chest. And that's not just me. Other guys have said the same thing. Like, it's violent, you know. Like, and it's a racing car, so you belt it. You know, it's not like you know, when you take a road car on the track, you're going to baby it a little bit because you don't want to abuse it, because driving flat out on the track's very hard on the machinery. But this car is built for that sort of thing, so you just get straight on it, and it's really quick.
Have you had?
And you got the massively hard braking and all the other stuff that goes with it, so it's just a whole different world, really.
Yeah, I imagine it's pretty awesome. So how have the cars evolved over time? So you've got 2 cars now, is that correct?
Well, we got the FZ, which we grew out of the T125, and we've got our car, the FZero, which is a clean design from scratch. We're building our own engine. It's got its own gearbox, which Ricardo are making, and custom for this car. And the whole car is built, you know, from the ground up, with every single component designed to go with it. There's no, except for some of the electronic gear and hydraulic bits and pieces. There's no, off-the-shelf stuff in this car. Everything's custom made.
Yeah. Does that car have a shield over your head sort of thing?
It's got a canopy.
Yeah.
So, you sit inside it completely enclosed. It's got air conditioning because you need it because it's going to get way too hot in there otherwise. But then the advantage of that is that it's not going to be uncomfortable driving the car in the summer, which can even the open wheel cars are pretty good in the hot weather because you get enough air even if it's hot air. But if like in a GT car that's got we got a McLaren 570 GT4 here that we use with the customers. And the air conditioning in it's so good that in the height of summer you can still have the cabin at 20 degrees, and nice. That does make a lot of difference to the comfort level.
Yeah, I remember I drove what was it? It was a 997 Gen 2 GT3 RS at Porsche a while ago, and it was spec'd without aircon, and I just drove it for a bit, and they're like, "Yeah, it's a bit lighter." It's like no one is going to be faster in this car over like an hour than.
Yeah. Well, in Ferrari Challenge, obviously it's hot in Asia.
Yeah.
All the time at every round, and the cars have air conditioning, but it's not air conditioning like the road cars have. It's moderately effective, but it's not great. In Singapore, we used the water-cooled T-shirts.
Yeah.
And the last time I was in Singapore, we couldn't get the water-cooled T-shirt to work on the start. And I couldn't get to the end of the race. A couple of laps from home, I just had to stop because I got to the stage where I couldn't push the accelerator all the way down to the floor anymore. I was just totally screwed from the heat because it's so hot there.
Yeah.
Even the cars struggle with the heat. So,
yeah, I can imagine. How do those cool shirts work? Is it like... I've no idea how they work. Are they like little water pipes and then a pump or something?
You got plastic tubes sewn to the T-shirt and you plug it into a pump thing. And what you normally do is there's water in the pump and you put ice into the box before you start the race. But, of course, the ice melts about halfway through. So towards the end, it becomes a lot less effective. But it does help you a lot, because... it's really difficult. If you get too hot, you just can't operate.
Yeah. Do they do cooled helmets? I feel like I've seen that.
They do, but a few guys use those as well, but I've never found that to be a problem. And we made a little fan thing. This is one of the advantages of having your own stuff. There's a little electric fan that we got clipped onto the side of the roll cage.
Yeah.
And it blows air onto my face and I can just adjust the angle.
Yeah.
And that's been an absolute winner. I used it last year and I think the year before, and it just makes so much difference. Because, now you got the moving air, even though it's hot air, it's hot cabin air, but it's moving. Whereas without it, you're just in that hot box.
Yeah, and it's getting all that sweat away. So with your engines, do you have a place in the UK now?
We've got a showroom in Donington, but the engine's actually being done by Neil Brown in the UK. We originally started with a guy that I used to know over there, and then we switched the project over to them about a year and a half ago.
And what's the engine, or what are the engine's options?
It's a 4-litre V10, so it's a complete ground-up design. Again, there's no common parts or off-the-shelf parts around that. Everything in this engine is bespoke, and the thing is basically designed and built to basically a Formula One standard. So you got a 4-litre V10. We're going to have turbo and non-turbo versions of it. And, it's got latest technology, so you got finger followers on the cams. And we'll probably work with Marl a bit further down the track to use the turbulent jet ignition on it. And, it's basically a petrol engine that we're trying to squeeze the absolute most out of. And we hope to use it in the road car as long as the emissions don't prove too difficult.
So there's going to be a road car?
Yeah, we're going to build a road car because, I always wanted to build a road car. I mean, We only really gravitated to the track because there's no regulatory issues, and from an engineering standpoint, it's an easier task because there's all sorts of stuff you don't have to be concerned with. But yeah, we've always wanted to build road cars. The only thing about it is it's a single-seat road car. My wife thinks that's a terrible idea, but anyway, we'll see how it goes.
Well, there aren't, like you said before, there aren't many single-seater road cars out there. So,
the back mono guys have done all right with theirs, so I don't think it's an issue.
Yeah. And will it look?
I'm not comfortable driving fast with a passenger in the car, and I think it's a bit, it's a bit off.
Yeah.
I certainly wouldn't enjoy being the passenger and the driver's getting right on it. I wouldn't enjoy that at all. So,
No, it's a sign of a good driver when they tailor their speed to their passenger. Like, passengers getting uncomfortable, you've got to slow down.
Yeah, well, I hate passenger laps because they do them at challenge. Like, my coach is always real keen to do a passenger lap, the first couple of laps and that. And I just told him, look, besides the fact that I'm going to throw up after the passenger lap, I just don't enjoy them. I hate passenger laps.
Yeah. I definitely, I used to do them quite a bit. I have a Radical.
Yeah.
An SR3 with my coach. Used to do them a lot early days, and then now I'm just like, nah. Like, when there's turbos in the car, it's heavier, it doesn't feel right. I'd rather be driving.
Yeah, it scares the shit out of me, to be honest. God, yeah. I did the Ferrari Challenge course. Actually, I've done it 3 times, but in one of them, the guy just absolutely insisted. And at the end of the straight, where you brake, I just looked down at the floor. Because, he's not braking any later than I brake. I mean, I lapped the car just as quick as he did. But, yeah, I just did not enjoy that at all.
Yeah. There's definitely that thing of being a passenger. And even if they're going to brake, you're not the one pressing the brake pedal. So you're like,
Oh, it's awful. And you brake so late. Like, our straight here is 900 metres long, and we brake at the 150 in the challenge car, and we brake at the 100 in the open wheel car. And, the challenge car does 272 before you brake. So it's like, and you cover that 100, 150 metres real quick.
Yeah, when you're going that fast, that braking that bit later is mad. So with these cars, how is it tricky to make them reliable? Is that what are people going to need to run them? What's the deal with that?
Well, the FZ's built a little bit more robust than the old F1s used to be built. I mean, I haven't had much to do with real current F1s, but the older cars were very, very lightly built because, they're built down to a 605 kilogram weight with the driver, and it's very light. And so, a lot of the parts are very, very flimsy. Like the Leighton House had fabricated steel uprights, and they were fabricated out of about 1 mil sheet. So they're just not going to have a long lifespan because it's just they're so thin and things and lots of that kind of stuff. If you just beef it up a little bit, then it's much more durable. It's like with the GP2, like you can run a GP2 pretty much the whole season without any real issues. Because the cars are robust enough to do it, and it only really requires a little bit, not a great deal, but there's a weight penalty. But if it's not relevant, it doesn't really matter.
And with your cars, would you need to run them with a few people? Do you need to cycle oil around the engine before you start it and stuff like that?
Yeah, we preheat the engine, and in the FZero, like, we have pump outs for the coolant and the oil. So after you run the car, you pump the coolant and the oil out, pump the fuel out. But none of this stuff is difficult. Like, we run the car here basically with one guy.
Right. Okay.
And you can easily run it with one guy. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that you need to do, but none of it's particularly tricky. And it's no great issue. It's just sort of there's a lot of details that you need to attend to, but like with any racing car, I mean, like, it starts with the tyre pressures. You've got to set the tyre pressures cold. We always preheat the tyres here because then you can go full speed in turn one and then preheat the engine. You check a lot of stuff on these sort of cars because you don't want things to go wrong.
Yeah.
And just, all that kind of stuff. So there's detail stuff, but none of it's difficult. Anyone who's had any experience with running cars on the track isn't going to have any issues with it.
And what sort of timeline would you get between rebuilds on engines and stuff like that? Like 30 hours or something?
We measure it in kilometres. I mean, the Cosworth engines are probably going to last, 5,000 Ks. On our engine, we'd expect it to last 10,000 kilometres. It really depends on sort of the duty cycle and how hard it's driven and all this kind of stuff. And that last 1,000 RPM sort of probably halves the life and doesn't make much difference to the performance. So there's a fair few variables, and the cars won't be driven as aggressively as they will with a professional. So
yeah. And what are the engines revving to?
The FZ runs to 10,000 RPM.
Ooh.
On our engine, the turbo engines will run to 9,000 and we'll run the normally aspirated to 10 or more than 10, probably 11 eventually.
Wow. That must be quite something getting in a car.
Yeah, it sounds pretty good. Although we put mufflers on the original engines just had a very short collector stub, which actually, it was loud, but it didn't actually sound that good.
Yeah.
And we've made sort of small 3D printed titanium mufflers which just take the edge off it and it actually sounds better. So, yeah.
Do you run into issues with sound where you are, like people complaining the car's too loud or whatever?
Well, we've only really got two neighbours within, a couple of kilometres.
Okay.
The cars are not that loud, the muffler takes sort of that real high edge off it. And so it's really within the sort of the legal limit, even though it makes a decent note, because the problem you're going to have is you can't sell the cars anywhere if they're too noisy.
Yeah.
So you've got to be mindful of being able to deal with that because you won't be able to run it.
Yeah, like it's one of those issues that always comes up. Is like everyone likes their cars to sound, be a certain volume or whatever, but to run them on a track pretty much anywhere in the world, unless you've got a specifically unlimited day, you have to reach, 105 or something, which is actually quite quiet.
Yeah, and that's one of the issues. And look, I've been to heaps of Ferrari days where they had the old F1s, and to be honest, they're pretty noisy. They hurt your ears.
Yeah.
They're so loud. So I think it's a little bit disingenuous for people to cry their eyes out about how they can't be as noisy as the old F1s, because those things are pretty darn loud.
Yeah. I go to some of the Peter Auto events. I don't know if you've come across them. A bunch of old Le Mans cars, all racing, and they're all on straight pipes. And they now do up to sort of 2014, I think, back from when the stuff didn't have seatbelts up till then. And things like a 430 GT2 on like that fires up, and you just like. You're wearing headphones all the time. Like I'm literally wearing earplugs all the time because it's just disgustingly loud.
Yeah, well, that doesn't make a lot of sense, and using the muffler on the car just takes that edge off it. I mean, look, you can still hear the engine, but it's not, as much as I don't like the whole situation where people can complain and whatever, you got to live in the real world as well, and you're just shooting yourself in the foot if you give them an opportunity.
Yeah.
Because, there's always going to be some squeaky wheel that wants to stop people from doing something just because they can. So you just play into their hands if you just go overboard on it.
Being able to drive this sort of car, like your cars, has that completely ruined all other cars on track for you?
Well, I've got other cars, I got the Senna GTR.
Yeah.
And this G57, and no, it hasn't, because they're all different. And the big thing about driving on the track is that on the track you can drive the car to the limit, and you can explore the sort of the full possibilities. And we like to sort of muck around with the setups on the cars here just to try to, just from an engineering standpoint, just to try to, like on the challenge car, like the first year I did challenge, I mean it was a mission just to get to the end of the race physically because I'm old and they're 30-minute races and it was a killer. So I never really bothered the engineer. But the second year, I had a practice car here, and I used to work with one of my guys, and we did a lot of work on the setup. And the challenge car, the 488 Challenge, has got a problem with understeer, and you know we did all kinds. So anyway, we used to fax a sheet to Ferrari before every round with the setup because we developed the setup here, and like we got a 54-second lap, and we improved the on setup. There's about 2 seconds difference.
Oh wow!
Just on our track, just on setup. You know, that made a huge difference. So that kind of stuff is fun, and it's helpful to allow you to work with it. In the last year, in 2019, I went with the engineer's setup because he was a bit unhappy about the fact that he was, you know, and I was okay with it. So I worked with him on the setup at the rounds instead of doing it here. But, you know, that kind of stuff's enjoyable. And like even on the GTR, like the out of the box setup on the GTR isn't great. Where we have it now, it's pretty good. It could probably be slightly better improved, but it's overall not bad. It's, you know, really pretty good. But, you know, you want to, like I've done 1,700 kilometres in my GTR.
Nice. So what's that car like to drive?
It's pretty good. It's got a slightly better balance in the chassis than the Challenge car has, and the engine's a bit disappointing, but I think it's mainly the gearbox. It doesn't go any quicker, even though it's got 815 or 25 horsepower and weighs 1,200 kilograms, and the Challenge car's got 660 and weighs 1,400. It doesn't go any quicker on our straight than the Challenge car because I think it's got the road gearbox in it, and the ratios are just too high. Right. And it just makes the engine lazy, and it just takes the edge right off the performance. You know, it's a quick car, but it's the weakest 800 horsepower I've ever felt in a car, really. Like that's so weird that like that is the case. And I guess, can you adjust the ratios and stuff on that car, or not really? No, it's basically a road box. I think that, like, if I wanted to take the engine just onto the limiter, I could drive it on our straight in fifth gear. I mean, I normally pull to 6 just to save the engine, but that's how. And we've got a 900 metre straight, so okay, there's tracks where the straights are a bit longer, but not much longer. Yeah, and it's really not correctly geared. So Ferrari's building me a GT car that's in effect a combination of the best things in the GT3 and GTE, and with the engine unrestricted.
Oh, sick.
And it'll have a racing gearbox and the whole thing, and so hopefully it'll go a bit better in that regard. So
I bet that'll be pretty cool.
Yeah, it should be. I hope so. We should get it, I don't know, in a couple of months' time. They're working on it at the moment.
Awesome. So do you find most cars, let's say that type of car, whether it's like Senna GTR or a Challenge car and stuff, are they all set up quite like, sort of understeery, like quite sort of friendly in the sense that, you know, the front always pushes? I
mean, look, you can understand it because the driving level of the customers, if the car's got a neutral balance, it's going to be problematic. But like, you can't really, I have done it, but you can't really spin a 488 Challenge car because you can't get enough grip in the front tyres to get it to bite at the front, and so it'll spin, it'll always wash out. I understand it, but I find it difficult because I don't like understeer because you can't carry the speed into the turns, you know, just really. And I've driven the 488 GT3 and, you know, it's much closer to a racing car than in that sense. Mm. But, yeah, I understand why they do it. And some guys like it, you know, like some guys can sort of, in fact, probably most people probably prefer it because it is very, it's very reassuring. Yeah. And it does make the car good to drive in the wet because we get a fair few wet races. And in a wet race, you know, it's very easy to just feel where the grip is in the front and just, you know, get along there. And so I understand why they do it, but, you know.
Yeah, and then like you said, there's that bit, that extra second, 2 seconds of having a car that's like fully, will go.
Well, it's like that video where Chris Harris took the Senna GTR road car to Silverstone, and he had the 650S GT3, and he lapped 7 seconds a lap quicker in the GT3, even though he was down probably 200 horsepower.
Yeah.
And he was just saying all the way through the video that there's so much understeer here, I can't do anything. And I know that was a conscious effort in the setup of the car.
Yeah.
So that's how debilitating that kind of thing is for lap time.
Yeah, and tyres and all that sort of stuff.
Well, yeah, I mean, look, the slick tyres are, even, Trofeo Rs and Sport Cup 2s and that kind of stuff, they're much better than your regular road tyre, but they're nowhere near as good as a slick tyre, not even close.
No. I always find it an interesting situation when you look at people that might be doing, I don't know, might have bought something, like a Senna or something like that, and be using it on a track, or these sort of like track day cars from manufacturers in comparison to an actual race car. Because like I know if I go to a track day with my Radical, it's only got 250 horsepower, but I will lap faster than any supercar by quite a significant margin. And so for me, I get in a supercar again, and I'm like, this feels like a boat. It's heavy, it understeers, it can only do about 4 laps, and then it overheats. So it's interesting seeing people, going for these different cars when you could go, well, you could just have the race car version.
Yeah, well, look, purpose-built racing cars are an instrument. Like we have F3s here, and I've got sort of my own F3. The F3s have got a few negatives, but, it's a purpose-built racing car. So, it's capable of, although the GTR laps many, many seconds quicker. Like I can lap our track 7 or 8 seconds quicker in the GTR than I can in the F3.
Well, that's interesting. What sort of power is a Formula 3 car?
Well, mine's got basically a road engine, and it's a 2-litre 4, so it's probably got about 200 horsepower.
Oh, okay.
They have no power at all. Not even sure, 400 and something or 500. They're very light.
Yeah.
And they're good in the turns, but, I mean, there's no... Like, the thing does 220 on the straight.
Yeah.
The other cars do, like, 270. It's pathetic by comparison. It doesn't even feel like there's anything happening at all. You just nail the throttle and just pull the lever. But, of course, they steer better, and you can adjust the balance of them so easily to exactly where you want it to be and all this sort of stuff. And you can go too far in any direction on the setup easily, whereas the other cars, it's always a bit of a struggle to really move it to, in effect, somewhere that's wrong because you just haven't got the options.
Yeah, it's that's really nice to be able to go too far. I've done it with my car where we've gone like full stiff, like lock it off all the way and drive it, and you're like, okay, that is a bit too stiff. And you're like, okay, fine. But I imagine, like you said, there'll be cars that you might want to soften up the front more or whatever, and you're just like, no, can't do it.
Well, I mean, it'll work better in some turns than others and all this sort of stuff. Like the G57 has got its behaviour in the slow speed mechanical turns is quite different to the high speed turns. Like we've got a 130 metre radius turn here. And you go through, the G57 goes through there at over 170k, GTR goes through at 160, and the F3 goes through at 150. The G57 has quite a different feel in that turn than it does in the other slower speed turns, which are sort of more like around 90k.
How much faster is a F2 car than an F3? Quite a lot more power.
Oh, you mean GP2? Yeah, well, shit. GP2's got 600 horsepower.
It's quite a big difference.
Like, GP2s are quick. They're fast. They're on a whole, they're totally different level to the F3.
Well, it sounds like you've got some cool stuff going on down there. Are you full-time in New Zealand now? Are you living...
Well, unfortunately, I'm stuck in New Zealand. I've been here for 11 months. I flew back from the first round of challenge last year, and I've been stuck here ever since because I'm not a New Zealand citizen, and if I leave, I can't get back in.
Oh yeah.
So, you know.
I was meant to be in New Zealand December, January, on my honeymoon, and we had a plan, and I was actually going to try and see if we could do something, because I think I'm coming quite near you, or was going to be, but stuck in the UK.
You're welcome to come here anytime you can get here, but I don't know when they're going to sort out that problem. I hope it's soon, because it's a pest.
Timeline wise, with your cars, can you buy an FZ right now?
Yeah.
How long would it take to be delivered if someone ordered?
Well, we've got a car on the way to the showroom in Donington. It'll be there in a week or two. Like, I mean, if some guy's breaking his neck to buy it, we can sell it to him.
Yeah.
And we're building other cars here at the moment.
Yeah. And
so the biggest impediment is the amount of time it takes to ship from New Zealand to the UK.
And do you plonk them on a boat, or do you put them on a plane, or does that depend?
We did send a car to a customer on the plane, but it's not very good. It's really better to ship it on the boat, because you've got spare wheels and you've got equipment and you've got stuff to go with it, and it's so expensive to air freight.
Yeah.
And unless you get a freighter, like you can get the car on a passenger plane, which is much cheaper than a freighter, but it's still really expensive. But if you're going to put it on a passenger plane, you've got to take the front and rear wings off, and it's really tight and difficult. So it's not something we'd recommend if you could avoid it, because it's difficult and it's hard not to sort of damage the car a bit.
Yeah, yeah. And if you and if you buy a car, does it come with a bunch of spares and extra body panels and stuff like that, or you get the car and you can...
We don't supply it as is with extra wings and all that stuff, but we have those things, so there's really no point in buying it until you need it, because we have them. And suspension arms and all that kind of stuff. We carry all those kind of things, so we basically supply the basic car. We'd normally recommend a couple of sets of extra wheels, and then we supply equipment to preheat the engine and the normal sort of pit gear that you need to operate it. But a lot of the guys who are going to buy this sort of car have already got a lot of stuff, or they work with someone who's already got a lot of stuff, so we'd really just work with the customer to supply. Like with the GTR, McLaren supplies everything you need to run the GTR, like the big torque wrenches and tons and tons of stuff, and the air guns and this and that and blah, blah, blah. But like we already had all that stuff. So if they bundled that into the price, we'd just be paying for stuff we already have.
Yeah.
And a lot of the customers will be in that position.
Yeah, I imagine most of your customers, or all of your customers, run a bunch of other cars, I imagine, of a similar sort of...
Yeah, you're going to... Look, they're going to work their way up to this type of car. I mean, look, you could start in it. I'm not saying you couldn't, but... In reality, guys will have worked their way up from smaller cars, because that's just the way things are,
Yeah. The and then the FZero, where is that in its design and production process?
Well, the engine and gearbox is just about done. They've been, Ricardo's doing the engine, the gearbox, Neil Brown's doing the engine. We've got a huge amount of carbon stuff down here, and most of the other bits and pieces. So we should have the prototype of that running this year, and we should be able to build cars next year without any real issue.
Do you have like some numbers for sort of how fast you think that's going to be?
Well, like I said, our aim is to make it quicker than a current F1. Our plan will be to take the car to Sepang.
Right, yeah.
Because Sepang's the nearest F1 track. We can ship up to Sepang in about 20 days. And I'm not going to drive it in Sepang, but I've done tons of mileage in Sepang because we race there in Challenge.
Yeah.
And they normally have a test weekend there as well. So, the track is right near the airport. The whole thing's very convenient. So we'll ship the car up to Sepang, and all we got to do is lap it under 90 seconds and the job's done. So, we'll obviously run it here, and we can benchmark it against the other cars, and we can extrapolate, because GP2s used to run there, we can extrapolate what we think the lap times need to be here, so we can get a pretty fair idea where we're going to be. And look, it's a turbo. So, in a worst case scenario, you just wind up the power of it.
Quali mode.
Fits off the tyres, And, look, we have no limitations on the aero. So, we can get 4,000 kilograms of downforce on this thing.
Do you know,
if we need it.
I have no idea what a modern F1 is sort of limited-ish, or any numbers for a modern F1 car, really.
I think it's hard to know because there's not a lot of data, but I think the current cars are somewhere between around about 2,500, maybe pushing up towards 3.
At what speed is that?
Well, that's the other thing, because as you know, the downforce goes up as the square of the increase in the velocity. We use 300 kilometres an hour because, we're on the metric system, but a lot of the older data was done at 200 mile an hour, which is 320.
Okay, so a bit
and
faster,
even going from 320 to going to 320 from 300 does add quite a lot of stuff. So I don't really know, but you'll notice that there's virtually no information in the public domain of what the F1 cars have got. So we're not really, no one's really sure, where they're at, but they're not at 4,000 kilograms, that's for sure.
Yeah, because I always think when I hear of manufacturers releasing their downforce figures for their car, whether it's like a McLaren P1 and they'll say it's got 600 kilos of downforce at 185 miles an hour, that's just not that much. And you compare it to
well, even
other
the GTR's got a, I think they claim a pretty high number for the downforce on it, but I don't know. It doesn't feel, I'm not. It does have grip in the high speed turn.
Compared it to a single seater, it's not the same.
No, but then look, I've never really experienced that whole sort of you can really feel the downforce working stuff. On the track, you just drive the car up to the limit.
My first experience of it really, not necessarily feeling the downforce, but it kind of was at Silverstone. It's like Maggots Beckett's and then an Albion Farm, those two. They're all flat in an SR3, not super fast, but like, I don't know, 120 miles an hour, something like that. But that is 20 miles an hour faster than any road car. And you really get you start to feel the G-forces and you just feel like fully locked down. And that was the first time I think I experienced downforce. But I think before then I had this thing that everyone chats about that I don't know who spread it because it's just not true, that, oh yeah, you need to go a certain speed before the downforce starts working. It's like, well, that's just not how physics works. Like it gradually increases as you go faster.
You can certainly feel the force in the side force in the turn, absolutely. But I mean, that's just, there's no sort of magical transition. Geez, you just go quicker and it's got more grip, and then eventually it runs wide. Like I've run off the track here on pretty much every car I got because, you just push in a little bit too quick and, it'll either just start to move in the back or it'll just run wide in the front, and then you realise that, you're not going to make it. And like I had one in the GTR where I just pushed it right in. It just started to sort of drift wide and I could see that it was going to get near the edge, and if I'd have turned the wheel more to stay on the track, it would have spun, so I just drove onto the grass. But, you just drive the car up to wherever the limit is, and that's it. That's as fast as it'll basically go.
There's no difference between pretty much any road car and any race car. They're all, well, okay, not quite, but that in itself, and then add in super lightweight, 500, 600, 700 kilos, that sort of weight, and downforce and slicks, and that's it. It's just, you're just gone. You just round the outside of everyone everywhere.
I mean, I got a 488 GTB road car, and one thing that's actually good about it is you can take it onto the track and drive it at sort of about 80 or 90%, and you can really feel how the weight transfer of that car basically works. Like you can brake into the turns, trail the brake in, you can tip the weight onto the nose, which makes the car turn well, and all this sort of stuff. And it helps you, like, from a practice standpoint, because it's so easy, it moves around so much. But when you get into the challenge car, the suspension in it's so tight that you don't get those feelings in the same way because the car's just nailed down so tight. It's still doing the same things, but it's much easier to pick up the signals in the road car than it is in the race car.
Yeah, much smaller window. And then presumably in the single-seaters as well, that's another step. especially with all the high downforce, they're quite stiff, and you just that window just gets narrower and narrower and narrower and narrower, and you can feel it, but like it gets tougher.
Yeah, they're much more difficult to drive, vastly more difficult. Even the F3 is much more difficult to drive than a GT car. But the one thing that is good about them is that you can tune the balance so easily, and then it allows you to just sort of pretty much attack the corner, and the car will do whatever it's going to do with that setup, and you can sort of adjust it, and that is a big help.
These cars like the challenge cars and stuff like that, they have multi-stage traction control and things like that, don't they? And ABS.
Yeah, but I never use the traction control in practice. Never. I wouldn't even use it at practice in a round, because you want to be able to understand what the car's doing. I'll use it in a race because you'll probably be quicker if you use traction control, but I won't use it in practice.
And then, do your cars have any traction control, ABS, anything like that?
Well, we're going to have ABS because we're going to use the Bosch ABS system. The cars without ABS require a really high skill level to brake them as efficiently as they can. Like, you've really got to be like you see even the F1 guys struggle with it a bit. Yeah. So for customer cars, the ABS makes a lot more sense, because we have ABS on the challenge car and the GT cars, and it just makes the performance a lot more accessible. Okay, You're not a driving god, but you can actually enjoy yourself, because it's not much fun locking up tyres, and because the slick tyre, you've only got to lock it up, unless they're real hard compounds, you've only got to lock it up once or twice and the tyre's ruined.
Yeah, and if it's in the wet or whatever and you're locking stuff off, you might be in a wall. And that's a big bill.
Well, that too, you can still lock up the car in the wet even with the ABS, because if you aggressively attack a corner just real quick, you can still have an issue with it, but obviously it helps you a lot. For these kind of cars, the ABS is the only way to go.
Yeah.
Traction control, we'd have that as well, but it's not as important, because if the car's reasonably well set up, you can feel that without any great issue, and it's not as hard to deal with.
And let's say, with the amount of downforce numbers you're going to be looking at, can you give it a lot of throttle? What sort of speed can you give it, like full beans?
It doesn't make any real difference, because you just still drive the car on the limit. So when you go into a corner, you carry the speed in. If the car's on the limit and you apply the throttle, it'll spin, just like it will in the F3. Like, I got a nasty habit of always wanting to wind the throttle on a bit soon. And I've had numerous spins in the F3 where I thought I was well and truly out of this corner and I can nail it, but I wasn't. And, it won't really make any difference in that regard.
Yeah. Well, it sounds
like on the challenge car, it's got a really aggressive diff. And if you nail the power, especially in slippery conditions out of the turn, you can just spin it on the power.
No, it sounds like you're making a very cool car. I would love to see one at some point. Hopefully, I'll make it down to New Zealand at some point, do this honeymoon that never happened, and pop in and come and see you guys.
Yeah, well, I came to New Zealand in '78 for my honeymoon.
And I haven't really left.
Yeah, I mean, it's nice here,
It is nice. A cool place. I really like it. Right, so I normally wrap these up with 5 questions. Do you have a most memorable driving trip or journey?
Well, you can't beat a European road trip in a 12-cylinder Ferrari, and I've done heaps of those. Like, I've driven from my house in Italy to the UK non-stop in a GT3, a 996 GT3 I used to have. I needed it to get serviced, and it's difficult because I can't speak Italian, so I decided to drive it over to Pars in the UK to get it serviced. We wanted to put a louder muffler on it because it wasn't that loud. It was a fact, it had So I drove over with my wife. We hung around for a couple of days while they did it. Then we drove back. We get back to the house in Italy, and I said to her, it sounded better with the other pipe, because the Par guys had 3 sort of levels of sound, and I didn't want to go for the loudest one. So I went for the intermediate one, and it just wasn't quite doing it for me. So a couple of days later, I got back in the car and drove it back over and got him to change it.
Nice.
But driving in Europe is just absolutely fabulous. Look, I don't drive that fast, but compared to the police state we have to deal with in Australia and New Zealand, it's just absolutely fantastic.
Yeah. When I went to New Zealand, I couldn't believe, and I can understand why they sort of are, but the speed limit's everywhere. It's like 50.
It's like Australia. Everywhere you go, there's a sign. It's like Switzerland. Everywhere there's a sign, and they're all really low, and they have, on the main highway here, they've got 2 or 3 coppers whose job is to just drive up and down the highway all day. That's all they do.
Yeah.
So you're basically under constant police surveillance when you're in the car, and it's a very debilitating feeling. Like I once went to, when I bought that SVR Diablo, I bought it from a dealer in Germany. I flew to Frankfurt, I think it was, and I rented a car, and I was at the Avis desk, and then I saw this thing about you could rent a Porsche.
Oh, nice.
So I thought, well, why not? So I rented this 996 Carrera. It was black with a 6-speed, black interior, so the exact combination I would have specified if I bought the car. And I remember when I drove down onto the on-ramp onto the Autobahn and realised that I could drive at whatever speed I liked, the hair just went up on the back of my neck. It was unbelievable because I'd never experienced that before, because in Australia, especially, you just constantly got your eyes peeled for coppers.
Yeah.
So it was just mind-blowing that you were able to just do whatever you thought was the right thing to do.
I remember my first time on an Autobahn going fast. It was in a Porsche. It was I've got a 997 RS Gen 2. And you get to that sign that's de-restricted. And in my head goes, it's 70 miles an hour because that's what it is in the UK. And then you're like, no, there's no limit. And you're like, what? So you go to like 100 and you're like, no, they still can go. And it is the craziest feeling. Legally driving
I know, but
flat
I mean,
out.
look, but look, the whole idea that you should be limited to some arbitrary speed when you take into account all the different cars, all the different levels of skill, all the different levels of attention. Look, most people get in a car, turn the radio on and switch off.
It is ridiculous. The amount of times I'll be driving down a motorway and it's like horrific weather, like proper downpour, and I'll be driving really quite slowly in the slow lane, I don't know, 60 or something, and the limit's 70, and someone will go past me at 100 in a Range Rover, like on their phone, and I imagine the traction control is just going like the whole time.
Yeah, I know. It's just they drive completely unaware, and then they wonder why they get into an accident.
Yeah, you can get, the thing is now you can get away with it for so long, like traction control. The number of times I've been, and it's actually stops me getting in. I used to get in cars with random owners quite a lot on road trips and stuff like that. And I started to realize I got in with a couple of people who hadn't got a clue, like properly hadn't got a clue. And they were in something really fast. And you're sitting there and you can see the car is just trying to not kill you. It's trying to stop them killing you. They're just like every corner, just full beans. The car's like shaking around. And you just realize that actually, no, this is not worth it. Absolutely not.
Yeah, well, the thing is, the cars are so much quicker now than they used to be when I started to drive. Like that's probably the biggest change, just the sheer level of performance.
Yeah.
Like, I've got road cars with 800 horsepower. Yeah. And when I first started driving, the highest power you could buy in a car made in Australia was 300 horsepower, and people used to be aghast about how shocking it was and all the other stuff. And you get in one of those things, like I just bought an old 308 GT4 Ferrari, and it's got 255 horsepower. It doesn't weigh much, carburetors, blah blah blah. And I mean, I've got the 458, 488, F8, all that other stuff, and I mean, those things just obliterate it for power. Like, by comparison, it hasn't got any power at all. Yeah. Even though it's relatively quite quick, and in 75, it was like, wow, this thing's fantastic. But, like, Jesus, the Ferrari Pista, sheesh, that thing's just a rocket,
Yeah. It is It's so mad how it's changed. And then you're meant to be, these cars are road cars, and you just can't use that performance to any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, and that's the real issue, and that's why we sort of oriented more and more to the track car, because, okay, it's a pain in the neck to trail a car to the track, but at least you'll be able to enjoy it. And if anything goes wrong, you can trail at home. I mean,
yeah,
doing track days in a road car that you drive there, I mean, it's going to limit your enjoyment because you don't want to beat on the car too hard. And the cars are just not built for it. Like, I had a 968 CS Porsche, which I bought in the 90s, and it was actually not too bad on a track day. You could take it to the track. It had, obviously very stiff suspension, and it's got no engine power.
Yeah.
So it was actually okay on the track, but it was the lack of power that sort of really made it okay. But once you move up to sort of higher levels of power, the suspension just isn't there, to go with it, and that's all there is to it, and it's just not going to do the job.
Yeah.
And it's not going to be satisfying because, it just moves around too much.
Mm. And you either cook the brakes or whatever. And yeah, I know I have so much more fun on a track day or a test day or whatever, when unfortunately it is more expensive and stuff. But if I'm in a car that I know I can go in the gravel and it's not really a problem, or at the end of the day, like you said, if something goes wrong, it gets trailered home and you drive home in your comfy road car and you're like, yeah, it's not a problem. If it's in the back of your mind the entire day, you can't push as hard.
Well, look, it costs a megabuck fortune to replace the rotors on a Ferrari.
Yeah.
And if you beat on it, and the road car pads are a different setup to the race ones, and the race car pads last no time at all. And yeah, it's not going to be enjoyable, let's put it that way.
Right. This might be a tricky one. 5-car garage, unlimited value.
Jesus, I've got a much bigger garage than that just in New Zealand. Just a lot of Ferraris will do it.
A lot of Ferraris. What would be your top 5 Ferraris then?
Well, I do have a Monza.
Yeah. How's that?
But it's terrific, but it's not very usable because of the wind issue. So it's more of an ornament, really. You can drive. We're making a sort of a plastic thing which we've prototyped here, which works well,
okay,
and will allow you to drive it on the road without a helmet. Because the problem you've got is when you drive it on the road with the helmet, okay, there's no issue with the wind, but now you can't hear the engine.
Yeah.
And that sort of defeats the purpose. So with this, we will be able to drive it without a helmet, and you'll be able to hear the engine. So the Monza's pretty terrific. But I mean, look, I've got all the modern Ferrari cars. So any of those, and McLaren. I mean, I've got in Dubai. I've got 600 LT, 675 LT, 650S. And I got a 765 LT coming to New Zealand, and, all those cars are fabulous. They're all fantastic cars. So any of those cars would be, I got 2 Ferrari FFs. I got one in Dubai, and I bought a second-hand one in New Zealand because I liked it so much, and we put a tubey on it, and the engine note on that thing's just absolutely sublime.
So good.
It's not too loud, but it's got the full character of the 12-cylinder engine. I did nearly 20,000 kilometres in Europe in my FF, and the car's just perfect for that kind of thing. And our house is in the mountains, so we got a private driveway that gets snow on it.
Nice.
And the FF, with snow tyres, we could even get up the drive, with it covered in snow. So the FF is in terms of utilitarian things and the whole entertainment value, again, it's a fantastic car.
It's such when they first came out, I wasn't that sure, and then it massively started growing on me. And then GTC4 Lusso as well, like those 2 cars I now look at and go like, that's just such an amazing 4-seater, put a bit of luggage in, V12.
Yeah, well, you put the rear seats down. I got a GTC4 in Italy in my house there, and you put the seats down in the back and you can get everything you need in there. And when I'm in Europe with my wife, obviously she wants to travel with suitcases and all the other stuff, and we couldn't go anywhere in the other cars because Like we used to trip around in the GT3, but you had to pack everything into small bags and just sort of try to fit them in behind the roll cage. And so any of the Ferraris or the McLarens would be good. So I wouldn't feel bad, you know.
The buying cars in New Zealand, are your cars all registered to different places? Because I know Australia has crazy taxes, and you can only have.
Well, I've got an old 355 I bought there in 95, 96. But I wouldn't, the taxes are not as bad now that they've stopped manufacturing in Australia, but they used to be. Like when I first moved to Dubai in 07 or 08, 09, if you spec'd a Porsche or a Ferrari in Dubai exactly the same as Australia, it'd be half the price they were in Australia, literally. That differential's been pretty sharply closed. You know, they're still expensive. More expensive, and look, there's just too many coppers on the road in Australia. It's just unenjoyable. And I'm just sort of like, well, I just don't want to do it.
And large animals jumping out at you.
Well, not in Sydney, but it's just, you know, in New Zealand, it's, you know, I got a pile of cars here because I live out in the country and there's no traffic and, you know, blah, blah, blah. In Dubai, I mean, you know, Dubai is fantastic for the cars because the weather's good, so you never have to worry about, you know, mud and snow and crap and all the other stuff, and all the roads are new. It's all, you know, so, and obviously in Europe, well, yeah, I mean.
It's great. Yeah. Right. What do you think? No, you can only drive one car for the rest of your life, and you're allowed like a $500 banger on the side.
I'd probably go for an 8-cylinder Ferrari. 458, 488 F8. I think if it came down to it, because they're unbelievably capable. I don't think a lot of people realise just how good Ferrari is these days and how much effort they put into the cars and how much passion goes into the whole thing with Ferrari. I mean, you know, they love what they do there and they love the cars and they're on the case. You know what I mean? Like they just.
And they've done this thing.
It's a car company like no other.
Like recently, they've managed to bridge the gap. Like let's say you get an F8 or something like that. Like that is a proper sort of like Jekyll and Hyde. You can drive it like a normal car. Just put it in sport and it's just like cruise around. Granny can drive it, whatever. But then you can dial it up to the other end and it's got 700 and whatever horsepower.
Well, I never drive mine in sport, but the look, my day-to-day drive is either a Ferrari or a McLaren, and it's just no issue at all, not even slightly. And as you say, if you want to get on it, man, you can whistle up mind-blowingly quick speeds in absolutely no time. And as well as that, you know, like you push the thing into turns, everything's great. You know, like they're brilliantly engineered cars.
Yeah, I need to spend some more time in some more Ferraris. Right. What do you think is the most undervalued car at the moment?
You mean underappreciated or?
Yeah, well, it's sort of reflected in price, but you could take it as underappreciated.
I don't know. The FF probably was, to be honest. Although a few of the journalists who drove it could understand it.
I think it's almost a tricky car. Not. I don't think so. Maybe for journalists to understand. Now that's not necessarily a correct statement. I don't think, because I think you've got to look at it as like, this is a car I'm going to drive a lot as a sort of daily useful-ish car. Whereas I think lots of journalists get in it and just treat it. I'm probably tarring them all with a bit of a brush here. That's not correct. But, you know, how does it dynamically handle as a one-off half-an-hour experience or something? Yeah,
well, it's not a sports car in the sense of the 8-cylinder cars, obviously. So you got to look at it from a different perspective. But the thing is, we have mountain roads, you know, around the house in Italy, and obviously the 8-cylinder car there's much better. And I used to have I had a GT3 there, and obviously it was better than the FF. Look, it's the road. You're not driving that hard.
No.
And when you drive back from sort of northern Europe to get to our house, you got to drive over the mountains to get there, and in the winter it'll often be snowing. In that situation, and you're in the 8-cylinder car, you're going to really be screwed. Whereas in the FF, if you got winter tyres on it, you're going to make it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you know, so just a sort of a different. And obviously, when I was younger, I would have been much more hardcore and just said, "Oh well, no, I'm whatever, but you get a little bit more sensible. So it strikes that balance between the usability and the sports thing ideally. And one of the things that's so good about it is the engine note is so good. It's just got such a sublime engine note. It's just absolutely fabulous.
It does.
Not too loud, but the full character of the whole thing, and the controls and the gearbox and all the other stuff. I mean, like, it's just such a good car.
That engine is so good. It's just such
an amazing, it's unbelievable.
It's just like peak car sound, pretty much, unless you look at some race cars of sorts. But it's just an unbelievable sounding thing.
It's just it's a tremendous note.
And they're gone. It's discontinued. We're not going to see any more Ferraris like that, at least for now. We might see.
I know they're doing this horrible SUV thing.
Yeah. Right. Final question. What's the most interesting car to you at the moment? What has piqued your interest in the car world?
Well, obviously, it's the cars we're currently working on.
Yeah.
And I've got a couple of projects that I can't talk about, which are going to just, if we can get these to work the way they're going to be, it's just going to be absolutely sensational. So I'd really, that's the...
Watch this space.
Yeah. I bought a Yaris GR, though.
Oh, how's that? Other day. Have you...
It's pretty good.
Have you messed with it at all yet?
No, I haven't had a lot of success with doing aftermarket stuff, although I did watch Harry's Garage on YouTube the other week, and he had one, and he had a modified one.
Yeah.
And he was talking about how much better these aftermarket dampers were, and I did drive mine the other day, and where we are, the roads are terrible.
Yeah.
And so I might look into that side of it, because it could be improved out of sight with a bit better, with a more sophisticated damping on it. It needs something with a high-speed blow-off, because, it's a bit harsh on the sort of the bumpy crap.
Yeah. Yeah, your roads
but
are
overall,
very
it's a real good car. Yeah, well, they're worse than yours. Because, we had an earthquake come through here 4 years ago, and the whole ground has just been sort of, disturbed.
Oh, right.
And the roads, tar's like a big bit of rubber, so it just sort of moved around with the movement of the earth, and it's just, yeah.
I imagine that's causing... Did that mess with your track?
Yeah, there was... we had nearly 70 cracks from edge to edge, ranging from 3 millimetres wide to 450.
Okay.
It was an absolute nightmare, and it did damage to the buildings and the whole thing, and it was honestly... And I was here when it happened. I'd gone to bed after watching an F1 race, and it struck about midnight, and honestly, it was a really bad experience, and it's something I just don't even want to think about, to be honest.
No, that sounds awful. With the funnily enough, with the suspension on the Yaris, I did a podcast on Thursday with Ian Litchfield, who is the owner of that company that has modified them. One of the things he definitely focuses on is making cars better on the road around here, because a lot of sort of middle range-ish, not super expensive sports cars are all just quite stiffly sprung, and that the damping, they're not that well damped, and you kind of, I don't know, I don't understand it in the slightest, because it's just...
Well, the real problem you've got is that if you want to drive the car quick on smooth roads, whether it's on the road or the track, the dampers need to be pretty firm, because they got to control the movements, otherwise the thing's all over the place. But the problem you've got is when you take it onto bumpy roads, they aren't able to respond. So we're going to try a damper that's got a high-speed blow-off, because then the idea will be that when you hit those bumps, it'll just blow through. Okay. And I think it should smooth it out. Whether it'll work or not, I'm not sure, but that's our plan.
Worth a go. Fun, play with it. Yeah, I imagine that car's quite... I've got one coming to drive, I think, in 2 weeks. So I'm waiting, and then I'm going to try...
Yeah, I mean, it's a nice car, although you can't hear the engine until you're doing like 6,000 RPM, which is a bit disappointing. But I have got the sport muffler and a few of the other parts coming, so maybe we'll be able to improve that.
Yeah. It's a cool thing. I'm really glad they've made it, and it just seems like a great little car.
Yeah, it's a fun car. I mean, I like small cars that are, like that, because they're good to drive.
Yeah. Yeah, and driving something smaller on a road is really nice. Like, all these modern cars have just got so big that you don't have
Yeah, I
much
know.
lane
Well, I got
left.
this GT4. You put the GT4 up alongside the 458, 488 F8 thing, and it's like, holy cow, look at the difference in size,
Yeah.
you know? They're massive cars by comparison.
Cool. Well, thanks very much for coming on the podcast. It's been really interesting to talk to you.
Yeah, no problem.
And hopefully at some point, I'll be able to meet you in the flesh, maybe in New Zealand. Maybe I'll come across you at some other part of the world. Who knows?
Yeah, well, I'll be flying out of here the very day they open the border just so I can get out. Don't worry about that.
Cool. Well, thanks very much.
All right, thanks a lot for that.